Welcome to the Northern Rose podcast. I'm here with two special guests today, and we're going to talk about issues in Manchester specifically to do with women's running and safety outdoors. So if we can start, Dr. Caroline Miles, would you please introduce yourself to us and tell us about your expertise?
Yeah, so I'm Caroline Miles. I'm a senior lecturer in criminology at the University of Manchester, and my area of research is in various forms of gender-based violence, including honour-based abuse, violence within the family, femicide, and also this project that we're going to talk about today, which is about the abuse of women runners running in public spaces.
And Professor Rosemary Broad, please could you again tell us what your research is in?
Yeah, I'm Rose Broad. I'm a professor of criminology at the University of Manchester, and my research more generally has been about modern slavery and human trafficking, and particularly women's roles in that, and then also in this research that we're going to talk about today.
And so, based on your expertise, what kind of led you to the research on women's running and safety issues outdoors?
I think we're both runners and have been runners for a really long time, and we talked about it on and off about doing some research on this kind of everyday experiences of abuse. And also I'm a run leader in Salford, so I've spoken to lots of women who run there, and that kind of like, oh yeah, I've had that as well. And then we were talking about doing research on it for a while and thinking about different places that we might apply for funding from, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And I think that then led us to where we got to with this project that looks at the experiences of women and also whether they report what happens to them, and if they don't, why they don't do that, and what measures they take.
Yeah, so I think like all good research, it was born out of personal experience. And did you find that there was a real lack or gap in the research base for covering this topic? Yeah,
definitely. I think from a kind of policy perspective, I'm sure you will have seen things like the Safer Streets agenda that's trying to highlight women's safety in public places, and the police violence against women and girls direction of increasing trust and confidence in police, so they recognise that women don't report for various reasons. But academically, there is obviously lots of research on violence against women and girls in private spaces, in the nighttime economy, but not for women. And one of the things that we'll talk about is that we think that women as runners should be recognised as a distinct category within violence against women and girls, because there are specific things that increase your kind of vulnerabilities, maybe, if that's the right word. There's some research in sport about how, women don't participate in sport maybe as much as men do. So there's some there, but not specifically about that in relation to crime and sort of fear of things happening.
Yeah, because I think the reason I became interested in this topic was I saw you both talk in September. And as a man who runs, I have never experienced fear of being outdoors. And my partner will say she won't run on her own either, especially on canals or places that are not well lit, but I won't have that fear at all. So for me, and I think for maybe a lot of male runners, it's a blind spot because you don't feel that fear. And in terms of reporting and going about dealing with that fear, do you think that women have the resources available to them to look at how to run on their own safely outdoors, especially in the dark, or are those resources really lacking at the minute?
From our research findings?
Well, before you did your research, were there resources available, do you think, for going out and running safely?
Well, I think most women, if they want to run safely and they're not feeling very safe and it's dark or it's winter or they want to run by a canal, then they would be joining a running club or making sure they're running with somebody and not running in those areas they don't feel safe, or at times of day or at times of year when it's darker and they don't feel safe, and in quiet areas they just wouldn't do it. There's avoidance completely. Yeah.
And I think what you talked about before is something that we'd also talked about, and you with your husband and me with runners from running club that are men, and with my partner, is that they just go for a run, whereas women will think, where am I going to go, who am I going to go with, what time am I going to go, what route, what am I going to wear? Lots and lots of decisions. Whereas men will go, just going out. Like you just said before we were recording, you can go down the canal, and we're both no.
Yeah, and there's no thought about any kind of safety issues or what I wear, anything like that. It will just be I can just go for a run without any additional thinking time into that, which I think brings us nicely on to your research. So the article that you both published was called "The Safety Work of Women Who Run: Negotiating Fear Experiences and Normalisation of Abuse." So would you tell us a little bit about that research and what your findings were?
Yeah, so like we've already said, the background, how we came to it, the kind of our personal experience, the policy kind of context, and then the academic kind of gap in that literature. We wanted to show something that contributed to that. And there's some existing kind of literature from Runner's World. They did was it 2021?
Yeah.
Now, did a campaign called Reclaim Your Run, which you can still have a look on Instagram. There's still kind of active hashtag where women would share their experiences on there. And then there's other campaigns. There was a campaign by Adidas that found that 92% of women worry about their safety when they go for a run.
Wow.
That was across quite a few countries. So it's, women are going running, but they worry about it. And then on the more serious side of that, the background to the research that we felt was really important was that there was some murders of women while they were out running in America, in Australia, here. So there's kind of a massive range of experiences that women were having.
And were there any countries that stood as outliers where women didn't experience the same kind of abuse, or was it found a pattern across all kind of Western countries?
I think the research was conducted again across 9 countries, so it's not enough to be able to say that it doesn't happen anywhere. Really, anecdotally, it seems that there are certain countries like the UK, America, Australia, and Spain and Italy, but only anecdotally, where it might be particularly bad, and then other areas like Scandinavia where women seem to feel a lot safer and have a lot fewer experiences. But there's no systematic, broad-scale research internationally to be able to definitively say.
Right, yeah.
So then we were fortunate to get funding from the N8 Policing Research Partnership, the N8 PRP, who was a group of kind of northern police force areas, and they will work with academics on topics that they kind of identify together. So we were in collaboration with Greater Manchester Police and Merseyside Police, who were keen to find out, we were interested in the kind of experiences of women runners, and then we were also together keen to learn about whether women then report those experiences, because as we know from sort of criminology more generally, there's lots of barriers to not wanting to report crime. So looking at reporting and whether the police could do anything to kind of increase that kind of reporting patterns. So we had 3 sources of data. We had police data, so we were able to get data from 2 calendar years, 2021 and 2022, for all crimes that were reported to the police by women runners over a 2-year period that they had reported to GMP or Merseyside. We did an online survey with over 500 women across the 2 areas, asking them about their experiences, what they worried about, what they did about that. So what they kind of, what did they try and how did they try and make themselves safe, as you said before, what kind of impact that had on their running, whether they reported things, and if they didn't, why did they not report it? And if they did report it, what happened? And then we did some audio diaries with women. So that wasn't really about sort of hoping to capture reports of incidents. It was more about that day-to-day decision making that we talked about before, of like, when you go for a run, where are you going? What route are you going? What are you wearing? What time are you going? Are you going with someone else? So we asked women, they left us a voice message that ended up, they were quite detailed, weren't they, when they got back from a run. And that was really about, it reflected the same kind of things, and Caroline will talk about that in a little bit, I'm sure. But we wanted that kind of in-depth sort of just how it affects them in their day-to-day running routines.
Yeah, I think that I can understand absolutely why you got funding for that essential research, but why had the police not already conducted research like this, or gone out more explicitly to find people to do that research, do you think?
It wasn't really on their radar, was it? When we brought it to them, one of the police from the chief constable,
she was the NIRI superintendent, chief superintendent maybe,
in Merseyside
she was really
police,
supportive.
she was a woman runner.
Yeah.
And so you know, she was like, yes, as a woman runner, I can see that this is an issue, we'd like to do some work in this. Greater Manchester Police, there it had a general Vogue agenda, and that they were interested in looking at, you know, the abuse of women in public spaces, but it's not recorded specifically in police data, so it's not like you can search for it. We had to manually extract the data, didn't we, by just searching through anything, you know, involving women victims of a certain age that included the word run or jog, and manually extract it. So that it wasn't massively on their radar as an issue, and that's, you know, as we found out, because it's hugely underreported, and so if you're not looking for something that's not reported and you're not counting it, you don't really know it's an issue. So I think that's been really interesting from sharing the findings, that the police have become a lot more aware that this is a specific issue and it's part of that spectrum of violence against women and girls that hasn't perhaps been acknowledged previously. There's a lot of focus, as Rose said, on violence against women and girls within private spaces and domestic abuse in the nighttime economy, but not using public spaces for recreational physical activity.
Yeah.
And also I think police unfortunately don't have lots of resources to do research, so they're quite dependent on academics to say, we want to look at this. And like we said, there wasn't anybody looking at it, so kind of missing from police, because also academics hadn't said, let's have a look at this.
Yeah, and so I think that's a really great point, is that the police didn't have the resources maybe to look into these certain patterns of criminality or abuse that happens on the streets. And as academics, do you feel that that's a failure of the system to have these institutions not having the resources that they need, and that academics themselves have to go out and create these projects, or do you think that that's just the way it is?
I think resources are so tight across, you know, police, probation, prison service, social care, and, you know, everybody in our department does research because they want it to have impact. They want to work with all kinds of statutory and non-statutory organisations to try and achieve, you know, here's an article that I've written, but what good is that? How can we, you know, make improvements with that? And you need all these research skills to do that properly, which now in the current kind of funding sort of context that we're in, and the kind of shortage of resources, those organisations don't have. So for us, I think, I mean, we're all really happy to work with any organisations to try and do that research, to try and, you know, look at things that will help them.
Yeah.
But it is a problem.
And that's the point of the N8 Police Research Partnership funding that we applied for and were successful in being awarded. And it is precisely so that police can work with academics and have experts do that research that they don't necessarily have the resource for. So I think that is a really good scheme. Yeah. And it's you know, it's having a huge impact in lots of different areas, isn't it? So yeah, it is a resource issue, and it's, you know, connected to austerity, but it's, this is why we have funds like this. So
Right. And so can you tell us some of the patterns that you found in the various methods that you used to collect data?
Yeah, so as Rose said, we looked at the police data across Merseyside and Greater Manchester, and actually the numbers of recorded offences over that 2-year period across those two forces were relatively low. So there were 61 offences across Greater Manchester that were recorded by police over that 2-year period, another 20 in Merseyside, which on the face of it, you know, wouldn't indicate that this is a huge problem. And a lot of those cases in Greater Manchester were connected to one perpetrator who was a serial perpetrator who had abused many women. As he was cycling to work along a towpath, he was sexually assaulting them when they were running. So he because the police recognised that they were having lots of similar reports from women running along towpaths, they actually put together an undercover operation called Operation Carbon that was really successful, and they managed to apprehend him, and he was convicted and given a prison sentence. So that does show that it is really important to report these things to the police, and that actually, you know, if the police cannot identify that there's a problem, they can then do something about it.
Yeah.
But as I said, if people don't report it, then they don't know that there's a problem, and that was because one officer recognised that there were all these similar kind of cases being reported. So there were relatively low numbers. A lot of the ones that were reported were sexual offences and physical assaults, which would be the more serious end of the continuum of abuse that women runners experience. When we looked at the survey data, so as Ray said, approximately 500 women completed the survey, and 68% of those women across Greater Manchester and Merseyside said that they had experienced some form of abuse whilst out running. So that shows us that although those cases reported to the police were relatively small, actually this is a really, you know, part and parcel of women's experiences as runners. So 68% of them said that they had experienced abuse whilst out running, but only 5% of those women had reported them to the police. So that just shows us what an underreported problem this is, and actually they're just the tip of the iceberg, what does get reported and recorded by the police. And we asked them about why they didn't report to the police, and they gave us lots of different reasons, varying from, you know, I didn't have time, I didn't think it was that serious, I didn't think they'd have any evidence, I didn't want to stop and take a photo, so I didn't have any details of the person who had done it. By the time it's happened, you've run, you know, a few metres further and you don't want to turn around. A lot of low confidence in the police's ability to do anything, but also whether the police actually would want to do anything, and kind of a few comments about, well, you know, police don't do anything about rape, why are they going to, you know, care about women being catcalled or have things thrown at them when they run. So there were various reasons, but a lot of the women talked about just, this is happens so frequently when I run that I just accept this as something that happens to me as a woman runner, and I just have to put up with it. So that normalisation that Rose mentioned before is about women just completely accepting this. This is what happens. I'm not going to report it to the police. I'm not really going to tell anyone about it. But if you ask me, I've got all these stories, and they've had really varied stories of what had happened to them. A lot of women, it was about being followed, being intimidated, having men on foot or in kind of vehicles following them, driving very closely to them, shouting things, spitting, throwing things at them. And then there were a few physical and sexual assaults as well. So a variation in types of behaviour, but really frequent and really common. And because of these experiences, as we said, women really just internalise and just think this is something I have to accept if I want to run. They have this really high fear of what might happen when they run. So 82% of the women who responded to the survey said that they feared for their safety when they run, and that's a huge proportion. So 4 out of 5 women have fears while they're running, and they were talking about really serious fears. So they weren't saying, when we asked them what are you concerned about, they didn't say I'm concerned someone's going to shout at me or catcall me or anything like that. They were afraid of being sexually assaulted, kidnapped, raped, murdered. And again and again and again these kind of comments were coming through, which shows just how high those levels of fear are of really quite serious offences. And because of that, they then undertake all these measures that we've talked about, this kind of risk assessment before you even set a foot out the door, and changes to when you're going to run, where you're going to run, whether you're going to run on your own. Just complete, some women not running at all in the winter months, many women not running in the dark and only running at certain times of day, or as you said, you know, we talked about towpaths, avoiding them completely, or I'd only run on the towpath at a certain time of day or a certain time of the year, or if I was with my husband or my friend or my partner. And so that kind of huge amount of what we've referred to in our article as safety work that women undertake, that, you know, as we said before, men don't appear to engage in. It's like, well, I need to be able to see, so if I've got a head torch, I'm not going to be able to go down the towpath when it's dark. But that's about the extent of it, and it's not been talked about, and it's not recognised, and there's a real low level of awareness, and part of that is because it's really so normalised and just accepted as women, and that's connected to broader experiences of harassment in public spaces when doing other things by women as well. And then the audio diaries were very similar. As Rose said, we weren't asking women to talk about things that happened to them. It was just about the day-to-day decision making around running. And again, it was summertime, it was hot for a few weeks when we were kind of asking people to do these. So we had really interesting comments from women about, well, it was really hot. It's really great because it's light and it's summer, and I can go out in the evenings because it's light. However, I put a t-shirt on, or I put leggings on, even though I just wanted to run in shorts and a sports bra because I didn't want to draw attention to myself. So it's that idea of dressing for your run rather than for your safety, rather than what you're going to be comfortable in. So kind of pros are being summer and daylight hours and having a bit more freedom, but also that brings, there's going to be more people out drinking in parks, or potentially people who might say something to me, and I've got to think about what I wear and cover up myself. Practical precautions. So women also talk about taking a lot of carrying items with them, whether that's keys between their fingers or the phone or AirTags, or being tracked, or carrying a personal alarm, and only wearing one headphone so that they can hear what's going on around them. So a whole range of things, and that came across in the audio diaries, as well as the more kind of what we're always reluctant to call kind of lower level things, like, well, nothing happened, but there was a group of men at the bus stop and I felt really wary, and I wanted to go this way, but it was a dead end, and so I wouldn't go down there because I wouldn't feel safe. So that gave us some really interesting data, and also that normalisation of, well, yeah, this happened and that happened and I felt unsafe here, but I didn't mention it to anyone because this happens so frequently, why would I bother? So the findings were quite overwhelming in that respect, because from so many women saying the same thing over and over again, the same levels of fear and experiences, and all these measures that they take to make themselves feel safer.
And was there a kind of geographic location where women felt more fearful than others? Like, was city centre running or rural running? Did you find any in the data where women may have felt safer running?
I think a lot of women talk about running around residential areas and built up areas, not because they want to, but because that's where they feel safe. So not avoiding towpaths or avoiding running around parks. They might have, referred to, well, there's a really nice green space near me, but I'd never run around there because, I heard reports that there was a flasher there last year, that kind of thing. So actually, a lot of the women talked about running in really built up areas, and you run along busy roads where you've got all the pollution, the risk of being beeped at or whatever, but that's a different risk to running in a more rural area.
And we did some mapping of the police data. We did some mapping, and where women had reported those incidents had happened, they were clustered around green spaces and waterways. So it's not that those things are perhaps they happen in those places, which kind of links to women choosing not to run there. So where more serious things do happen, they're not happening along the main road, they're happening in these rural spaces. And I think, Greater Manchester has some such beautiful places and towpaths and river sides and parks. But when we looked at the data, like Caroline said, in the survey data, women would actually say there's a really nice country park near me, but I won't go in it. So we have access to these spaces that are away from roads, away from pollution, but women aren't using them. And in the data, in the police data, those more serious offences are happening there because they're more isolated, and people are less likely to be around.
And so for those 18% of women who maybe didn't have any fear when going for runs, what do you think maybe what kind of factors there are creating that idea that there may be no fear running?
That's really interesting. Someone asked us this recently as well, and we should look into that a lot more.
There's lots more research we'd like to be able to do.
So much more. But there were, a few comments about saying, "Oh yeah, these things have happened to me, but it doesn't stop me."
Right.
But I think there's a difference between it. Like, it doesn't stop me.
No, it doesn't stop me either.
But it doesn't stop me having fears and concerns. But it doesn't actually stop me still running in the dark, as I said I did this morning. But so they weren't. It wasn't that they hadn't had the experience. It was more a determination
to not let it limit their experience.
Yeah.
Like, I think when you're saying, Rose, about the country parks and not being able to access them, it is like, although they are freely accessible, they're not because of the abuse.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's where you need the authorities to take action to make sure that although they may seem on the face of it freely accessible, actually they're not, because of these behaviours that happen within them.
Yeah.
And so after your research, did they take some of this data on board, some of the findings on board?
Yeah, and I think, like Caroline said, that the example of Operation Carbon was really it was awful, but it was really good in demonstrating that if people record things, the police have got the ability to put them together. Because one person saying something happened, they think, oh, there's no point, it's just me. But if actually, I think there were 21, it was across Greater Manchester over the border into Cheshire, so there was some in Greater Manchester and some in Cheshire. When people put them all together, the police can say, look, there's a pattern.
Yeah.
So that was a really good example for the police to reflect on that and say, that was really good. How can we encourage women to report? And I think the Is This OK campaign, which you've probably seen, that the mayor's office ran, the very first example in that is a woman running, and she passes by a man in a park.
And they're taking photos of her.
That's right,
commenting on the phones.
And nothing, you might come away from that and think, well, there's nothing to report there. But if you can share that information and those people are doing it to lots and lots of people, then I think the information sharing is really useful. And the police have been really responsive, haven't they, to the research and the Jog On campaign that came from it. So we met with a man from West Yorkshire Police, an officer from West Yorkshire Police, and they then ran a campaign called the Jog On campaign.
He read about our research in the news, hadn't he?
Yeah, and he got in touch with us saying, can we have a chat about it? And the Jog On campaign, which you'll be able to look at and have a look at a bit more information, but they very specifically looked at the kind of abuse of women runners in areas. They had undercover police officers running, and then things would happen and they were able to deal with it on the spot. They had on-the-spot fines, didn't they? They went to local park runs to kind of increase awareness. And that Jog On campaign has now run in 4 areas, I think.
Yeah, it's run in different areas across West Yorkshire, hasn't it? Because it was in Bradford and then it was...
And then in Worcester and Surrey.
Yeah. And Greater Manchester are considering rolling it out as well.
And then also local authorities, because I think, you know, the police, like you've said, you know, resources are very short. And this is not entirely a police problem. It's also looking at what can we do urban planning wise, how can we make spaces more accessible to everybody. So we've met with quite a few local authorities in Greater Manchester, and they're really keen to learn how they can, you know, what they can learn about in their area. And I met with an MP as well for Rochdale. He was really keen to learn what, you know, specifically what they could do there. So I think there's lots of sort of momentum and motivation around doing something about it. What we really want, though, is the onus not to be on women and girls. Women aren't have to join a running club or do all of these measures. It's about what can we do about boys and men that's more important here.
Absolutely, and we'll link to the Jog On campaign in the notes. But I think that's a really key point, and something that I'd like us to return to again later as well, about the not just saying it's a women and girls problem, but actually it's a societal problem, and these are structural problems that are almost embedded within society, and how do we engage with them more broadly. And so have you found that these campaigns have women come and said, actually I feel more safe with things like the Jog On campaign? Have they led to women feeling less fear?
We don't know, because this has all been...
It's quite recent, isn't it?
Yeah. Right. So one thing we'd like to do is do some form of evaluation of those campaigns and see what impact they've had. Have they increased reports to the police? Have they increased police activity? Have they had any impact on women's feelings of safety? But it's too soon at this moment to be able to... But
it's great to know that already that the work you've done has been publicised and people have come forward and saying, you know, we want to find ways to help to have an impact, to change to change the experience of women runners.
Yeah, and we've had that from beyond the police as well. So we had a local running group from Stockport got in touch with us and asked us to come and talk to their running club, to the men and women runners, about the research. And then the men in particular at the end of that we're asking, you know, what can we do? And they asked if there was any bystander training. So we then organised for a bystander training event to that run club, which was really good. And again, they've made various changes in their running club, have welfare officers, and they said the fact that it had opened up conversations, that women are now talking about it, and the men are now realising, oh, actually, this is your experience and it's really different to mine. So that awareness raising and having the bystander training has been really useful as well. Yeah,
and I think the encouraging women to report, like you've talked about here, is that creating that data set then enables pattern finding afterwards. So actually, it would be hugely important if women do have negative experiences or do experience something on their run, that they report it so that it's catalogued. Ultimately, they may feel unsatisfied with the police action at the time, but just having it catalogued allows somebody to look back in the future and use that data.
Yeah, and we've looked at other things as well, because I think rightly some women said somebody only did this, and I'm not saying it's not serious, but I'm not going to phone the police, somebody just shouted out of a car window. But we're looking at asking women, would it be helpful to share that on an app? Because then you can, the police can't deal with that. But if you've got maybe an app, and there are apps that exist, there's a Manchester one, I've forgotten what it's called.
It's not Street Safe, is it? I think that's a national. No, I can't remember.
No, but
we'll put
you can have a look.
Thing in, yeah.
And there is an app, but I don't think it's very widely used. So it's about, we've got a project that starts in January where one of our colleagues is going to pilot an app. She worked previously with Transport for Greater London to encourage reporting of similar kinds of issues on public transport.
Yeah.
So she's going to look at an app where women can share their experiences, and just to build that picture, because I think you need to know what things look like.
Yeah, but as we've said, I think what we really want to do is lead to change that doesn't involve women having to, yes, women, it is important that women feel confident and realise that this is not okay and that they can and should report it, but actually what we really want to do is have change that doesn't involve women having to change their behaviour or take action. It's about what can we do to stop this happening in the first place and make everyone aware that it's not acceptable. So that's
which I think perfectly brings us to the strategies that you put forward in your article for preventing abuse of women runners. So if you'd talk us through some of those strategies, please.
So we've done the work with the police and we've done a lot of engagement with the public, haven't we, as well? So there's those kind of elements. And then from a policy angle, we've got policy at Manchester who have worked really closely with us and supported us a lot and arranged an event where they invited lots of regional and national kind of key stakeholders along, and that was really helpful for us to share our research findings with policymakers, because that is difficult, making that policy change, and as a result of that we met with various MPs across the country, and then we were also invited to go to London and meet with Jess Phillips and Jess Sato. Jess Phillips is the Violence Against Women and Girls and Safety Minister, and we would like to see this being recognised in the Violence Against Women and Girls agenda. As Rose said right at the start, we're arguing that as well as recognising violence and abuse against women and girls within private spheres, you need to be recognising it in public, which it is, but that women runners are a distinct group because ideally they want to be running on their own at quiet times of day, in isolated or more quiet spaces where they've not got lots of people and cars around them, because that's not a pleasant running experience. They're wearing fewer clothes, they're carrying further items. If you're running, you might be like 6-7 miles away from home, so you've got that distance as well. And clearly, it seems to be that some men are targeting women and directing abuse at them whilst they're running. So we would really like them to be recognised as a distinct group and actually feeding into campaigns and campaigns and work with boys and men in particular, and also from the public health perspective, as you said, there is research and there's a lot of work around gender equality in sports participation, but a lot of that focus is on team sports and around kind of girls' participation in football and those kind of things. Actually, there's a lot less focus on individual activities like running, and we know that running has become a lot more popular in recent years, and actually young girls in particular are taking up running at fast rates. But we need to do some work around making sure they're able to do that safely and confidently.
And did you find MPs and people like Jess Phillips receptive to taking on board your suggestions?
I think the people that we met with, the policy at Manchester sent out a briefing, which is just a really short, like you said, people are not going to read the whole article. We don't expect them to. It's academic kind of purposes, but they did a really good short briefing that got sent out to MPs, and the MPs then contacted the policy at Manchester. So they were people that were specifically interested. Specifically interested in it. So they were receptive because they'd contacted us in general.
Yeah, and definitely recognising this as a problem and raising awareness. violence against women and girls is currently recognised as a national emergency. The violence against women and girls agenda is going to be released on Thursday, and I think there will be more in there about women and girls in public spaces. But I think domestic abuse is, for understandable reasons, up there, as a priority in the agenda, because it's such a widespread problem. What we argue is that it's possible that the same men who are being abusive towards women and girls within the home are also the people who are doing this in public spaces, and it's recognising violence against women and girls as a continuum and a spectrum, and it's closing that bridge between what happens inside the home and what happens outside the home. But it's absolutely on the agenda, and it's recognised as a huge problem, which is good in terms of it leading to it being addressed.
Yeah, and to go on to that point about it likely being perpetrators who are committing domestic violence inside the home are also likely to be the men who are abusing women runners. What about those kind of structural inequalities? Do you think that this comes from lack of education? Does it come from where would you say the structural problems lie then in the broader implications of violence against women?
I think I'll come back to that. I think in the kind of wider context, like Caroline said, there are lots and lots of men who are really keen to, what can I do? How can I help? Especially men runners. Yeah. Lots of male runners that I'm in my running club, and people who run or whose partners run and go, what should I do if there's a woman running on her own? I'm worried. Where do I look? What should I do? Yeah. And I think the bystander training was fantastic, wasn't it? And that kind of harnesses lots and lots of men's positive attitudes towards this. So it is a big problem, but it's not all men at all. And we've said that repeatedly, haven't we? It's not all men, but it's always men. So it's always men that are women are not catcalling other women. I also think the fact that you keep having to say it's not all men as well is an issue, because of course it's not all men, but I think that the fact that you have to keep saying that shows that people will jump on that to say, it's not me. But actually it's about reflecting that this is a problem. How do we engage with it, rather than it's the kind of the same thing with, well, I'm not a racist, so that racism can't exist around here. That kind of and then do you find that frustrating, dealing with that kind of critique of, well, it's I'm not responsible for this, or do you think actually it's a positive that people are willing to help or willing to be engaged? I think we haven't had it's not me, we've more had what can I do, but I suppose that's the people that have turned up to things that we've been doing because they're more interested in it. We haven't had that much kind of it's not me. I really didn't realise. Yes, like you said. And this has really opened my eyes to the differential experiences of men and women, and actually, as a man, what can I do? Which is really, really positive. We need to focus on that rather than the people who get stuck on the point. And I think, to go back to what you asked, I think I don't know is the answer to what you asked about what kind of factors make people. There's lots of research about what is it that makes men be abusive, and I think like Caroline said, one of the things that the police also were interested in is, are the people that are doing this also abusive at home? And when it's not to say everybody that wolf whistles is also going home and being abusive, we're not saying that either, but I think are there patterns of behaviour where people start off doing things that are what might be classed as low level, even though we might not like that term, that then escalate into more serious offending. I think there's a piece of research to do around that. More generally, I think that's such a difficult question of all of these gender inequalities that exist, like you were talking about before we were recording, about inequalities in wages, inequalities in all different kinds of measures that women experience. All of those underpin all of this as well. So to really have longer term change where women say, I feel completely safe to go and run along a towpath, is such a long term change and really difficult to do. And it's embedded in education, in just all parts of life, I think, where you need changes. And that's beyond my kind of expertise, I think. But it's such an interdisciplinary problem. I think we're just starting a project that starts in January with Greater Manchester Combined Authority on women road users, so it's much wider than just pedestrians. But we're working with geography, people from geography in that, which is something, you know, we don't know about, kind of urban planning.
Yeah.
But that's great because that adds something that we don't know about.
Yeah.
And I think, like Caroline also mentioned, public health. And it would be great to do work with education, you know, people who work with really young boys on kind of how those attitudes develop, because I think it must start, you know, change has to start there. So I think there's lots of work to be done.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly the key to this, is that it's multifaceted and it will require different disciplines addressing what is a problem across society, and it's not just limited to women runners. It's across every aspect of society. And have you looked into whether, because Caroline, you mentioned that you like to go hiking as well, do you think that these problems are more extreme within women running, for women who are running, or is it across other outdoor activities as well that women participate in?
I think it is absolutely other forms of activity as well. People have asked us before, why didn't you look at women cyclists? And as I said, it's because we think there's something unique about women runners. You know, you can't cycle off. I'm not suggesting it doesn't happen to women cyclists, but I do know, for example, that the women's running group in Stockport that we did some work with, somebody there I was speaking to also runs a project called Bird Outdoors, and that's all about women going out hiking and, you know, using public spaces to go walking on their own as well. And it's a recognised, and I've personally done a training course that was just for women on orienteering in the Peak District, and it was about, there's a lot of work about giving women more confidence to get out there on their own, but there is a similar fear of women don't want to go out hiking in the moors by themselves because they feel vulnerable. So there's been no research on it, but the fact that that kind of thing exists, the training I did existed, and this Bird Outdoors project, I think is a good indication that it's not just women runners, it's women using public spaces for all kinds of different activities. This is one example that we wanted to look specifically at, but it's definitely,
and I think like you said before, probably the only difference, a couple of differences. One is what you would wear, because you don't get quite as hot, so you're more likely to be much more covered up when you're hiking than when you're running, and you can carry more things with you. Not that you should have to carry more things, but you can easily carry lots of things when you're hiking, whereas when you're running you have as little as possible. So I think it does like you say, I totally agree that it happens across all kinds of different outdoor activities, but women runners are distinct for various reasons. I also think the speed, even if you're not going that fast, I think there's something about the speed that somebody goes past someone that gives the person, the abuser person, oh, well, I can just say this because they're going to go. If you're walking, it's a bit more, sorry, what did you say? And then it's all embarrassing and everybody's notices what they've said, and it's kind of, I think it doesn't, people don't take the opportunity perhaps that is presented when somebody runs past.
Yeah, there's something unique about the situation of running with you, ideally being as light as possible, wanting to wear clothes that don't get soaked down with your sweat or rain. So there is a unique situation going on there that leads to maybe people feeling it's more acceptable to be. Is that the right way of saying that?
I don't know, except maybe not.
No, just seen as fair game.
As an opportunity.
Don't know.
No, don't know. We don't know.
And would you think it would be interesting to, have you spoken to any men who have committed or who have told you that they have? No, for this research it was, limited just to this. I think we would like to. I think it's quite difficult though, because we need to think about how to do that and not just have a room of people that are going to kind of generate that. It's quite difficult to do that. So we would have to think really carefully methods-wise about how to do that. But I think it's really important. There's a lot to learn about what sits behind that. And thank you so much for talking to us. And we've already heard a lot about the impact that your research has already had, which I think is incredible, considering that academia sometimes, in my own work, I felt the impact hasn't always been there with the research that I've done. But how have you managed to do this? Have you felt that you've really had to work hard to have the impact that you've wanted to have, or have you felt that actually there's been a lot of public interest, and so people have come to you and helped you to have the impact. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, people have come to us a lot, which has been a great response, and we've been really intrigued and, you know, welcome the response that we've had that we've not had in our other research, actually. It does involve a lot of work. We've done a lot of public engagement work. We've done a lot of meetings. We've met with a lot of, you know, MPs. We've met with whoever we could because we're really keen for this research to have an impact. But it does take hard work, and you do have to think about how, and I think you might want to say a bit more about this, it's about the message that you can package around this, and it's thinking, well, what are the key points?
Yeah, I think quite early on, I think even just thinking about what are the recommendations, because it's kind of easy to say, here are lots of problems, and then people say, what can we do about them? I don't know. So really having to think about that, and that's quite, you know, hard work of looking at it and thinking, right, really, what are the problems and what can be done about it now? What is longer term? And this is the sort of balance, isn't it, between women saying, well, I want to run on my own, but I don't. I run as part of a group, or I don't want to make a recommendation that women join running groups. That's just not. Yeah. But for short term, if you really want to go running and you're worried about it, then that's what people do. But, you know, we keep saying the onus needs to be on boys and men. I think we've also had a lot of support. Policy at Manchester have been fantastic. Brilliant. You know, the kind of structural support in the university. First of all, of the engagement with media, they sent out. They did a press release quite early on, which was really helpful, which led to the BBC Northwest filming and the article in The Guardian. They were quite close together, weren't they? And you were on the radio, BBC Radio
Manchester?
Something, So all of those things happened really quickly after the press release. And then, like Caroline said, we worked with Policy at Manchester for kind of more in-depth things to engage with local and national policymakers, so all of this sort of engagement that we've had with boroughs. And then we were approached by the running club to then do things. And then I think because we've got this new project, we'll be able to link back and forward, because although it's about road users, part of that is pedestrians, so we'll be able to kind of link that up and develop that.
And the police as well, because it was a police project, and we worked, you know, in partnership with Merseyside and GMP, and so they were really keen for us to get the research out there.
And we did a webinar, didn't we?
We did a recorded webinar from the N8, but then, you know, we presented to the police forces, to their evidence-based practice boards. We've been invited to a few police conferences about evidence-based practice. So the police have been really proactive. Yeah. But again, it's mostly been people approaching us rather than us, you know, beyond the initial, you know, producing the article and the briefing report and the policy briefings and doing the webinar. It's mainly been... So there was that initial work of us pushing it out there, but then the response has been much greater than we...
Which has been really interesting, I think, compared to our other research. And I think it's what we were talking about before we were recording, that this is something that lots and lots of people can identify with. Because even if they don't run, they probably know somebody that runs. So people really care about it. And that's not to say people don't care about modern slavery, but it feels further away. Whereas somebody, oh yeah, my sister runs, my daughter runs, my whoever runs, and yeah, they've said that to me. Or I run as a man, and I didn't know that. Like you said, it's a blind spot, and I've not thought of it before. So I think just the kind of people really care about running. People really love it, and they can relate to it. Yeah, they want to do something about it.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing that you're having to put the work in initially, but then having that all of that reception where people are coming to you saying, how can we help? It must be really rewarding. And is that kind of the reason that you wanted to get into academia in the first place? Was it for that impact?
Yeah, it really was for me. I used to work in criminal justice kind of for a long time. I didn't come to academia until later on. So for me, it was like, yes, what can I do? How can I, not particularly to do with the roles that I did, but just in general, what research can I do, and how can I work with organisations?
Yeah, and similarly, and it wasn't couched as impact or identified as impact. It was more about just making a difference, making a change. I used to work many years ago for NACRO, which is a crime reduction charity, and doing that. I think when you do that kind of work in practice, you think, how can I actually do something that's going to make a change?
that could change the structural side.
And it's only small, you know, a little bit of research, but
Yeah.
if everybody's, you know, doing those things, and Caroline went to a panel at a conference with other people who were doing research about the abuse of women in public spaces. So to get, you know, starts to build this picture, and how can we sort of contribute in a little way to that picture?
Absolutely, I think, you know, those small gains end up adding up to something really large, don't they? Just one other thing I'd like to ask you about is some kind, you know, whether the pushback or criticism, how you handle that side of things, because I suppose once you become exposed to, you know, more public facing research, do you find that difficult, or are you able to kind of deal with it quite easily?
I think we've tried to focus on the positive responses, haven't we?
Yeah, which have been massive majority.
Yeah.
We haven't had so many negative responses.
It's obviously frustrating sometimes when there's a pushback to the findings of this kind of research. But we've had so much positive responses from men and women that I think we've just focused on that and what we can do, rather than spending time kind of dwelling on the more negative kind of. And I think that's a bit of a misunderstanding, like we said, that, you know, if you're saying anything that involves men being abusive towards women, that you're suggesting that all men are abusers, and that is clearly not the case, and it's clearly not what we're saying. But there's enough evidence that women in their everyday lives, whether that's in the home, in the street, in the workplace, you know, are abused in many different ways, predominantly, not always, by men and girls, by men and boys. And I think it's just, we've got to keep pushing it, because it's, you know, we care about it.
I do.
And I think on that note, thank you both so much. It's been really amazing to hear the work that you're doing, and it is having a real impact, which is great to see. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.